you. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to episode 4.1 of the New World-Order series, the trial of Cousin Eddie that I have going on. I've been getting a lot of comments that people are enjoying it, so I'm very happy about that. So today I want to share a document with you that I came across back in 2013, and it's from a woman named Julianne McKinney, and she's the director of the Association of National Security Alumni, and it's about an electronic surveillance project. She wrote about that. I'm not sure if you can find it on the internet anymore. I've had it since the printout I have is from 2013. So, and this will go along with the MK Ultra part of one of the videos that I did in this series. So let's get started, shall we? As Lady C says. So MK Ultra, and a lot of you, well, now if you didn't know before, that all falls down to, and I've gotten some comments about that too. It's from about gang stalking and targeted individuals. They target people for MK Ultra. And this is also going to cover microwave harassment, mind control experimentation, and gang stalking. The Bolsheviks. Now, I have been, we were always led to believe that the Soviets, and there were bad Soviets and there were good Soviets, just like there's bad Republicans, bad Democrats, good Republicans, and good Democrats. There's always bad apples within the barrel of things. So we were always led to believe that the KGB was the problem, and there were bad KGB agents, I'm sure. But I have been learning that it's more the Bolsheviks that were the problem. And at least one or a few of my viewers and our friends have brought up the Bolsheviks to me, and I was kind of along that same path. So that just sort of reinforces what I've been coming across. As mentioned at my education and my family, and what I learned from them, there's still stuff that I don't know. I mean, it's impossible to know everything. So I'm grateful for that, and that I'm going on the right path. So, but yes, they target people, and then they do this thing called gang stalking, which that will go into, that will be discussed in the document, which this is going to be one of 3 videos because it's a 30-page document, and I don't want to completely bore you, so I'm going to have to split it up. But it's very interesting. So obviously, Vladimir Lenin was, the father of the Bolshevik Revolution. They killed the Romanovs, which right there is no reason to, if you don't want a royal family anymore, there's no reason to try and wipe them off the face of the planet, in my opinion. So, and then the man in the bottom is Woodrow Wilson, who was president of the United States at the time when that happened. He was not a good guy either. I know a little bit about why he's not a good guy. I can do a video about him if you'd like, but he definitely was not a good guy, and he was in office at that time. So I'm sure he had something to do with it, and he was very big into eugenics and had Nazi ties early on, like Fabian socialist ties and everything like that. And then we have my favorite, old Adolf Hitler, who the Germans, I don't think, were using anything like that. Anything like what I'm going to be talking about. And I'm not sure if the Bolsheviks did or not at that time, but the Nazis are the ones who started all of this gang stalking and targeted harassment and everything. I know that's going to be a surprise to you. And then people adopted it. But, this document's going to talk about the KGB, but I do believe in there somewhere that she does go into the Nazi stuff. But they are the actual ones who started it. And I've known that through other research after I found this document in 2013. So just real quick, we have targeted individuals, organized gang stalking, the CIA, the NSA, Department of Homeland Security, FBI, all question marks, remote neural monitoring, thought surveillance, mind control, organized stalking, that's gang stalking, electromagnetic torture, and human targets. Now, I did 2 videos back in, one was on December 4th, 2021, and the other was December 5th, 2021, showing that there are these Africans. Now, some of them live in Africa, and others were living in London, but they're from Africa. And they were talking about these things that were happening to them. I know this for a fact that these things happen. I've experienced them in my life also, and this document's going to prove that it's real. And they were talking, some of you may have seen it, and they were talking about how, they're being groomed and, told through, like, it's called voice to skull, where they like put words in, they like can put words and thoughts into your head. And that's why sometimes people are diagnosed with schizophrenia when they're not schizophrenic. They're actually hearing voices that are being put into their head. It's all possible. We live in the year 2022, so there's no reason to think that there isn't the technology to be able to do this. That's what people often forget. I mean, it's 2022. They can pretty much do anything. And if they're not doing it, they're working on it. So I'm going to show you what these folks look like at the end after I read the document. It'll put a human face to them. I ask if you have to like turn off the video, just please go to the end of the video to at least see the people behind this. It is real, and they do it to people, and it's very sad. But this was one of the videos. I'll put both of the videos in the description box. It's called Social Media, the new gunpowder plot. That was a series that I did. And this one was called Death Threats to Queen Elizabeth. And I was pretty upset about it because we were all being looked into on Twitter. Meanwhile, these people are crying for help, that these things are happening to them, and they're being groomed to kill Queen Elizabeth. And that all goes into tech transfers in Senegal and South Africa. That's all in one of the videos that Prick Harry and Cousin Eddie are involved with. So I'm just going to read you some of these tweets, and then we'll get into the document. This was their profile. They never want to discuss what triggered you, just how you reacted. They called themselves, wrote, "I am not a prototype, victim of U.S. military non-consensual mind control terrorism grooming. MK Ultra, V2K, that's voice to, I don't know what I know that there's a voice to skull. I don't know what they mean by the K. Sleeper cell. I talked about the sleeper cells. Manchurian candidate, targeted individual. And the handle is, I'm being tortured and abused. I love photo call. So let me just read these. Cutting off my internet, only connection to the outside world while grooming me in terrorism to kill the Queen at public engagements by suicide bombing. Total 24/7 abuse to control my thoughts by the second. Now, the United States military, the good above board military is not doing these things. These are probably your like paramilitary contractors with bad intentions, like global company contractors that, they just don't. People think that only the military is going to be able to do all these things. Well, no, like like Amazon has satellites. All these companies have satellites and everything, and they can do. They're just as capable of the military, if not more than capable of the military, because military has budgets and has people to answer to. These companies don't. I can't get up. I'm being tortured and abused by the U.S. military with RF radio frequencies grooming me in terrorism to kill the Queen at public engagements by suicide bombing. Now, these people don't want to do this, obviously. They don't want to do it. But why? Where is Twitter? These are cries out for help. But Twitter's too busy investigating people that don't like Cousin Eddie's lipstick and, as I've said a million times, and, investigating QAnon people people that are worried about a new vaccine. That's what they're busy with. Forget a head of state and a monarch, like the oldest, longest living monarch ever. I can't get up. I'm being tortured and abused by U.S. military with radio frequencies grooming me in terrorism. V2K torture and abuse by U.S. military grooming me in terrorism to kill the Queen. I feel pressure, transcranial brain stimulation on top of my head that's interfering with brain functioning by U.S. military, grooming me in terrorism to kill the Queen. Continued harassment by U.S. military, grooming me in terrorism. Didn't sleep well since yesterday. U.S. military have been brain hacking me, causing psychosis. So they're aware, but that still doesn't mean that this isn't happening. And and they didn't do anything. And let's keep in mind, in the past few months, Queen Elizabeth has had, 4 attempts on her life? She hadn't had that many. I think she had 3 the whole time she was, the monarch. And then she has 3 in the past few months when Crick Harry's doing all these things in Africa for gold and tech transfers and things like that. Continued all night with synthetic dreams of terrorism grooming. U.S. military, a lot of these are ongoing tension in my head, tortured and abused. U.S. military keep forcing RF frequency microwaves, grooming me in terrorism to kill the Queen at public engagements. So they're all talking, and while it sounds crazy, again, it's 2022. Companies have satellites. The military does. They can do this stuff. And I have this document that's going to prove that they do it. I mean, I'm going to read it to you. I'm going to show you the document. Here's just more of the same. So, and these are real people, like I said. If you don't have time, just please stick around or please fast forward to the end just so you can see the faces of these people. It's very sad. And they don't want to do it, and they're crying for help, and no one is listening. Well, we think no one was listening. I'm listening, but just here's more. These were all like, this is how these. This wasn't a mistake of me putting these. These are how many times they were tweeting out these things within just a few days. I found. Then in the second video, I had found more, which were disturbing. You should watch that video if you haven't. It's called "It's Too Late to Apologize." So here's another one. And they just kept retweeting and retweeting and retweeting. So here's the document. There's my writing. It was on, I printed it out on 4/18/2013. So let's get started. The prospect of domination of the nation's scholars by federal employment, project allocations, and the power of money is ever present and is gravely to be regarded. Yet in holding scientific research and discovery in respect as we should, we must also be alert to the equal and opposite danger that public policy could itself become the captive of a scientific technological elite. That would be like your Jeff Bezos and your Bill Gates and people like that. Covert actions are counterproductive, and that's from President Eisenhower, who is one of my favorite presidents. So I have, let's see, George Washington, Ronald Reagan, Donald Trump, Eisenhower, and who is my other one? Abraham Lincoln. Covert actions are counterproductive and damaging to the national interest of the United States. They are inimical to the operation of an effective national intelligence system and corruptive of civil liberties, including the functioning of the judiciary and a free press. Most importantly, they contradict the principles of democracy, national self-determination, and international law to which the United States is publicly committed. That was the credo of the Association of National Security Alumni. And the beginning title here is Microwave Harassment and Mind Control Experimentation by Julianne McKinney, Director, Electronic Service Project, Association of National Security Alumni. Okay. Oh, she wrote this in December 1992. So this was in December 1992 when she wrote it. So they were able to do this back then. Imagine what we're in 2022. So that's 30 years. Whither the KGB, ? In February 1974, Georgetown University Center for Strategic and International Studies hosted discussions on the plight of dissenters in the Soviet Union and on the means by which the U.S. government might most effectively intervene. Highlights of these discussions are reported in Understanding the Solzhenitsyn Affair, Dissent and Its Control in the USSR, CCIS 1974. KGB strategies were addressed in some detail during these discussions. It was noted that the KGB's success depended on the extensive use of informant networks and agent provocateurs, and following Brezhnev's rise to power, on the use of drugs and psychiatrists for further purposes of manipulation and control. Shadowing, bugging, slandering, blacklisting, and other related tactics were also cited as serving KGB purposes. This isn't just about the KGB, folks. The CIA does it too. This isn't about the KGB, and I'm talking about, the United States is who we're talking about today. Participants in the conference agreed that the KGB's obvious intent, it's a long document, you'll see at the end, obvious intent was to divide and isolate the populace, to spread fear, and to silence dissenters. Agencies of our own government are on record as having employed precisely these same tactics on a recurrent basis. The Church and Rockefeller Committee hearings in the mid-1970s purportedly put an end to these practices, but that doesn't mean companies can't do them, that are in bed with dirty politicians to get a new world order. Based on recent developments, it would appear that the CIA's and FBI's operations MKUltra, MHChaos, and Counter COINTELPRO, the focus of these Senate committee and vice president level hearings, were instead merely driven underground. We are now in contact with a total of 25 individuals scattered throughout the United States who firmly believe that they are being harassed by agencies of the U.S. government. Companies. Now it's companies. Others have been brought to our attention whom we will be contacting in the future. The majority of these individuals claim that their harassment and surveillance began in 1989. So Ronald Reagan was president until 1988, and he did all this Star Wars stuff, or like the Strategic Missile Defense System, and then in 1989 these things started. Now I'm not blaming George H.W. Bush, I'm just mentioning that those were the presidents at the time. The methods reportedly employed in these harassment campaigns bear a striking resemblance to those attributed to the CIA and FBI during operations MKUltra, MHChaos, and COINTELPRO. The only difference now is that the electronic harassment and experimentation also appear to be more blatantly involved. The Berlin Wall is down. Communism is in the midst of a death rattle, and the KGB no longer poses a threat, which purportedly served to justify the U.S. government's resort to such operations as MKUltra, MHChaos, and COINTELPRO. Am I saying that? Which is Counterintelligence Pro. The KGB since 1989 has been reduced to an increasingly distant memory. Reactivation of surveillance, harassment, mind control operations in this country suggests that the KGB as an institution was never the real threat. So there she says it. The KGB was never the real threat. A KGB mentality with its underlying pragmatic contempt for civil liberties appears instead to have been the driving force behind MKUltra, MHChaos, and Counterintelligence Pro, and the operations now being reported to us. The KGB mentality is a matter of personal prediction, or personal, I can't see that part, personal predilection, not ideology. Its objective is power and control, regardless of human cost. It is a corrupting, cancerous influence which feeds on fear, conformity, and government funding. That's your bad people, folks. That's your bad people. Four months ago, when this project commenced, we approached these complaints of government harassment and experimentation with an admitted high degree of caution. We are no longer skeptical. The growing numbers of independent complaints and the similarities between those complaints cannot be ignored. Under the circumstances, the KGB should be proud of itself. As a mentality, the KGB appears to be accomplishing more in burying this country from within than it could ever have hoped to achieve as an institution. It would appear that the country has a serious problem on its hands and needs to be resolved. Part 1 of this report, which is reprinted from the June-July 1992 edition of the Association's publication, unclassified, preliminarily addresses the complaints brought to our attention as of July 1992. Our objective, as noted, was to weigh the legitimacy of those complaints in terms of the directed energy technologies reportedly involved. Part 2 discusses the overt and covert patterns of harassment identified as a result of our investigations to date. A part of our A part of our objective here is to limit the success of such operations in the future by according them widespread publicity. They need to look into the company-owned satellites, because the militaries of each country have eyes on the other militaries, but they're not watching company, global conglomerate, World Economic Forum companies. In Part 2, we do not identify individuals by name, both to honor their privacy and because our investigations have not been completed. Part 2, like Part 1, is a preliminary finding. Our focus is on the similarities of the complaints being received, similarities which federal and state legislators, the courts, the FBI, and local law enforcement agencies, the medical and psychiatric professions, and organizations such as the ACLU and Amnesty International have so far chosen to ignore. Get out of town. We frankly find it curious that more attention and credibility is being accorded purported victims of UFO experiences and spectral visitations than to persons who complain of systematic harassment and experimentation by the U.S. government, involving technologies which the U.S. government is only now grudgingly admitting to possess. These complaints require investigation. In due course, and provided financial support is obtained, we hope to be able to acquire the technology and supportive medical expertise to substantiate the claims being made. We also hope to alter the institutional mindset that the U.S. intelligence can be trusted. There you go. This is somebody who works in U.S. intelligence and said that we need to change the mindset that U.S. intelligence can be trusted. History repeatedly has proven otherwise. Part 1, the problem surfaces. The August-September 1991 issue of Unclassified reviewed Hamline University's Public Administration Report on the resolution of MKUltra cases in 1988. Although the shocking details of medical ethics abuses by the U.S. and Canadian governments were amply detailed, Washington and Ottawa, citing national security and government privilege. Well, that's not good, because we pay for that. Stalled for so long that the cases never came to trial. Their surviving victims settled for a pittance in an out-of-court settlement. Since no individuals or agencies were held legally accountable, the door was left open for possible resumption of similar mind control activities. In the context of the article, we mentioned briefly that some half-dozen people had contacted us with appeals for assistance in ending what they believed to be electronic harassment and mind control experimentation, possibly involving the CIA. We decided to take a closer look at this situation. We are now in touch with approximately a dozen individuals located throughout the United States who appear to be targets of her, and then that would go to people in Africa, people in the UK, people everywhere. And I'm not going after my government per se. There's just bad, there's as mentioned, there's people that left their country after World War II that were on the run. And we're doing these types of, who did the experiments, folks? Who liked mind control? We are now throughout the United States who appear to be targets of harassment and mind control experimentation involving direct energy technologies. That's direct energy weapons, meaning they can just from space hit one person through your house, through like radiation and things like that. Typically, persons who complain of being zapped by radio waves and of hearing voices are stigmatized as psychotic, delusional, or schizophrenic. Being mindful of this, as well as aware of the treatment accorded UFO and psychic phenomena freaks, we approach the subject with a high degree of caution. Based on our preliminary investigation, including interviews with the affected individuals, we concluded that the matter is serious and should be pursued further. Our first step was to determine what, if any, technology exists which might be used for electronic harassment. The information was found in a white paper published in 1991 by the U.S. Global Strategy Council, a Washington-based organization, under the chairmanship of Ray Klein, former deputy director of the CIA. who maintains very close ties with the U.S. intelligence community. The white paper describes the foreign and domestic uses foreseen for laser weapons, isotropic radiators, that would be your isotopes, they're going to go off of after the atomic bombs were set off. Infrasound, non-nuclear electromagnetic pulse generators, and high-power microwave emitters. The term non-lethal used to describe this technology is misleading. The energy emitted from all of these weapons can kill when appropriately amplified. At lower levels of amplification, they can cause extreme forms of physical discomfort and debilitation. The Department of Army, DA, identifies these same weapons as non-conventional. Now, I'll say. They were so identified in an exhibit at a DA-sponsored symposium on the soldier as a system in Crystal City, Virginia, on June 30th, 1992. Beta wave incapacitators were separately mentioned during the symposium as being of particular interest to the U.S. Marine Corps. And our Marines, probably similarly to the UK's, are a part of the Navy. They're ground troops, the Navy's ground troops. Hence the word Marine. We discussed these non-conventional directed energy weapons with Mr. Vernon Schisler, manager of the exhibit and the Army's delegate to NATO, in matters pertaining to, what's NATO? Is anybody checking on NATO? Pertaining to the soldier as a system. Mr. Schisler acknowledged not only that the directed energy weapons are in Department of Defense arsenal, but also that the American soldier will remain vulnerable to their effects should they be employed in the battlefield. Well, now, why would the American... So, if America has these weapons, why would American soldiers be vulnerable to them? Who's doing it? Who would be directing our weapons at American soldiers? That's an interesting question. The U.S. Global Strategy Council recognizes the issue of vulnerability as well as and urges ongoing research into effecting countermeasures. Interested readers may want to send for the U.S. Global Strategy Council's complete project proposal on this subject, titled Non-Lethality, Development of a National Policy in Employing Non-Lethal Means in a New Strategic Era, prepared by Janet Morris. A number of references in the proposal to unidentified elusive enemies, who? The U.S. soldiers or the U.S. enemies? Of the U.S. government and to the potential domestic applications of this non-lethal technology invite serious consideration by the public at large. The Council's address is 1800 K Street, Northwest, Washington, D.C., 20006. There's your phone number. Bioeffects of microwave radiation. Research into the biological and psychological effects of exposure to microwave radiation is voluminous. The U.S. public has been led to believe that the former Soviet Union, the U.S. public has been led to believe that the former Soviet Union leads in this research. The fact is, the CIA and the DoD have jointly pursued precisely the same research since commencement of Project Pandora in the 1950s. The current primary users of this research appear to be the CIA and the DoD and the National Security Agency and the Department of Energy. So it wasn't Russia. Oh, I know that. I'm not going to get into that in this video. Russia's not the bad guy, folks. We're the bad guy. Well, parts of our government. So all of these places are using this technology, and then she's saying that the KGB's not the problem, the Soviet Union's not the problem, and the United States soldiers are vulnerable to this. The Walter Reed Army Institute of Research has participated in this research since Project Pandora. In 1973, Walter Reed Army Institute discovered that extremely induced auditory input could be achieved by means of pulsed microwave audiograms or analogs of spoken words and sounds, just like those Africans were talking about. The effect to kill Queen Elizabeth, in Africa, so they could start a war in Africa. That's all in the videos. The effect on the receiving end is the schizophrenic sensation of hearing voices which are not part of the recipient's own thought processes. When I was in the hospital, I was talking to a black woman, and she said that most African Americans are diagnosed as schizophrenic. Maybe because they all hear voices. That has nothing to do with mental illness, does it? The experiment prompted the following comment in the Body Electric, Electromagnetism, and the Foundation of Life by Robert O. Becker, MD, and Gary Seiden, William Morrow and Company in 1985. Such a device has obvious applications in covert and, just like the shooters, the school shooters, the Batman shooter, the girl that stabbed her dad, the Mummy Returns told her to kill her dad. Such device has obvious applications in covert operations designed to drive a target crazy with voices or deliver undetectable instructions to a programmed assassin. Kind of like those people in Africa saying they're being told to kill Queen Elizabeth. Kind of like that. This research, and QEII is, pretty deep in bed with our Department of Defense. And our president. Not my president. This research has continued, and the results are published in various publicly available scientific and technological journals. Interested readers might consult, for example, and that just lists, you guys can see that. Walter Reed Army Institute has more recently been studying the biological effects of exposure to high-power microwave radiation. Walter Reed presented a paper on this subject to a DoD-sponsored symposium on microwave weapons at the Naval Postgraduate School in Monterey, California, in the mid-1989. A matter of interest to us is why Walter Reed should be experimenting with auditory effects of pulsed microwave programs. Also, recent statements by an Army psychiatrist assigned to the Walter Reed Army Medical Center suggested that Walter Reed may be experimenting upon select psychiatric patients with microwaves. This, too, is a matter of interest to us. Yeah, me too, and I'm sure our friends. Congressional oversight. The government's past record of abuses in the area of civil rights is well documented. Within the past 30 years alone, we have witnessed the effects of Operations MK Ultra, MH Chaos, and COINTELPRO. Primarily because MK Ultra, MH Chaos, and COINTELPRO executive orders and implementing regulations were published which prohibited military and CIA domestic covert intelligence operations. Yeah, the CIA has no jurisdiction in the United States. It's not allowed to do anything. That's the FBI's job. So why are people in the CIA doing these things on American citizens and or soldiers or around the world? And again, QEII is deep in with our Department of Defense, folks. And these Africans are wanting to kill his grandmother anyway. Or no. Being told to kill his grandmother. Experiments on involuntary human subjects and the surveillance of collection of personal information on U.S. citizens, except under strictly regulated conditions, were also prohibited. Congressional committees were created to oversee compliance with these quasi-legal prohibitions. We have evidence that this is not being done. Moreover, there are laws, and in this case, no laws enacted. There are loopholes, as well as individual and institutions who deliberately capitalize upon existing loopholes. Companies. Iran-Contra is one of the more blatant recent examples. Loopholes are also found in government resort to black intelligence and weapons programs, in the use of contractors, and in the absence of clear definitions of such terms as national security and a national security risk. Anybody that isn't along with the establishment is a national security risk. Executive orders and regulations which currently limit official U.S. intelligence activities do not extend to non-intelligence government agencies or to their companies. That's a big loophole right there. In fact, Executive Order 12333 specifies that government contractors do not need to know that their services support U.S. intelligence objectives. It's getting worse and worse by the second. In its report of July 8, 1992, the U.S. Senate Subcommittee on Oversight of Government Management addresses the problem of tracking funds granted to government-contracted research and development centers. The report notes that the problem is compounded by DoD's penchant for creating hard-to-monitor shell contractors and disbursement centers for funding programs. Oh boy. Neither shell contractors nor their subcontractors are directly accountable to Congress. Being beyond congressional oversight, they have the license to operate as government surrogates in intelligence operations about which officially they know nothing about. Now, I would think that at least Microsoft and Amazon, because, Jeff Bezos is in space, have been at least approached by somebody, at best. Neither shell contractors nor their subcontractors are directly accountable to Congress, but being beyond congressional oversight, they have license to operate as government surrogates in intelligence operations about which officially they know nothing. In this context, a publication disseminated at DA's The Soldier as a System symposium noted that the Army's Research and Technology Program sponsors 42 laboratories, and R&D centers employing approximately 10,000 scientists and engineers. That sounds cozy. The annual budget of $1.3 billion is only a small part of overall DoD research spending. This was back in 1992, folks. Weapons research, which includes the development and testing of non-lethal weapons. Non-lethal. Maybe on the person it's not non-lethal, but if some poor African is told to Queen kill Elizabeth, and they do, because they're hearing voices in their head, I'd say that's pretty lethal. Weapons research, which includes the development and testing of non-lethal weapons, is... I might have read that. Hang on. Is not governed by laws restricting the activities of U.S. intelligence agencies, though it may be presumed that these agencies contribute to and benefit from such research. 1. The technology exists for the types of harassment and experimentation reported to us. Yeah, this was in 1992. It exists. About a dozen U.S. citizens have informed us of continuing experiences with effects which direct energy weapons are designed to produce. U.S. government-sponsored research into the bioeffects of exposure to microwave radiation is extensive and continuing. I know the Nazis were doing this to people in the 60s, blasting things through their homes. I know that. We're just, happening here. The U.S. government-sponsored research into the bioeffects exposures to microwave radiation is extensive and continuing. The U.S. government has a past record of having engaged in mind control experimentation, and various agencies of the government have a record of circumventing legal restrictions upon their activities. Neither Congress nor the courts appear to be willing to look closely into black intelligence, and weapons procurement programs. A number of U.S. government agencies might have interest in testing direct energy technologies on U.S. citizens under non-clinical, non-controlled circumstances. DoD to test ranges and degrees of non-lethality. Well, if Queen Elizabeth gets killed, that's pretty lethal. Thank goodness these Africans are strong. Department of Energy to explore safety limits, CIA to test mind control capabilities, and NSA for technological refinement. Part 2. Overt and Covert Harassment. Since publication of the preceding article less than 4 months ago, the Association of the NSA Electronic Surveillance Project has heard from an additional 13 individuals who report both overt harassment and a range of symptoms which coincide with the known effects of exposure to microwaves, electromagnetic radio frequency, and radiation and/or infrasound. The similarity of these symptoms will be addressed in greater detail in future project reports. Suffice it to say, at the point that the physical and psychological symptoms being reported to us are consistent with the effects which direct energy weapons are designed to produce. Indeed, the numerous affections or inflictions being reported appear to parallel standard torture sequelae, after effects. Overt harassment. Overt harassment, which obviously is meant to be observed, may be intended to precondition, this is your gang stalking, folks, may be intended to precondition individuals for eventual long-term electronic harassment. Persons terrified by unexplained overt harassments are not likely to cope with the sudden onset of electronic harassment in any more reasoned fashion. This phase pattern of harassment is apparent in all of the cases now being investigated. The fact that the overt harassment continues in these cases, even after the electronic targeting commences, suggests that the objective is to maintain long-term extremes of stress. Many of the overt harassment tactics discussed below are surfacing in cases which, so far, have not involved discernible forms of electronic harassment. These are cases involving so-called whistleblowers who, because of their inside knowledge of certain potentially newsworthy events, pose particular threats of embarrassment to the government or to government-affiliated employers. We have noticed that the electronic harassment is beginning to surface as a form of retaliation against persons who try to assist electronic harassees. Retaliation suggests long loss of control. Under the circumstances, we are not entirely confident that the whistleblowers will continue to be exempted from this type of harassment in the long term. The individuals now in touch with the project describe their circumstances as involving most, if not all, of the following overt forms of harassment: sudden, bizarrely rude treatment, isolation of acts of harassment and vandalism by formerly friendly neighbors. That's happened to me. Sudden, bizarrely rude treatment, isolation, and acts of harassment and vandalism by formerly friendly neighbors. Harassing telephone calls, which continue even after the targeted individual obtains new unlisted phone numbers. Mail interception, theft, and tampering. Noise campaigns, yes. While unrelenting harassment telephone calls might be considered in the context, other tactics are employed. Blaring horns, whistles, sirens, garbage disposal run concurrently in apartment settings for excessively prolonged period of time, and amplified transmissions of recorded general racket have been used on a recurrent basis under circumstances intended to persuade the individual that he or she is under surveillance. In all of these cases, the individual's neighbors apparently pretend to be oblivious and or indifferent to the sudden, continuous explosions of noise. Door slamming is also popular pastime, particularly in apartment buildings. I've had that. One individual reported that during the peak period of harassment, the neighbor across the hall began entering and leaving his apartment every 10 minutes, slamming the door loudly on each occasion. This was a daily occurrence, encompassing periods of several hours over a period of several months. It apparently served to trigger door slamming chain reaction on the part of neighbors, both on the floor and the floors immediately above and below. When our contact politely asked her immediate neighbor to close his door more quietly, he slammed the door in her face. Prior to commencement of this harassment, that neighbor had apparently been quite friendly and courteous. In another case, the primary door slammer is an employee of Radix Systems, Inc., Rockville, Maryland, a DoD contractor engaged in the super-secret research and development of some type of electronic equipment. Several individuals reported recurrent, loud, strange noises in their ventilation systems. I've had that. During the preliminary stages of their harassment. This was back in 2013 when in the one video I said I had a lot of bad things happen to me, and I was trying to get this information out, and a lot of bad things were happening and weird things were happening around me. Several individuals reported recurrent in their ventilation systems during the preliminary stages of harassment. One individual complained of being recurrently awakened in the middle of the night by the sound of wires being fed into his independent ventilation system. On checking further, he found that tubular construction had been built into his vent system, which appears to lead to the apartment upstairs. His upstairs neighbor is employed by the Department of Justice. A number of individuals report that the occupants of upstairs and downstairs apartment appear to follow them room to room, tapping on the floor, engaging in other activities which appear intended to advertise ongoing surveillance. I've had plenty of bizarre things happen to me in my apartment. So. The Justice Department employee mentioned above went so far as to offer an unsolicited apology to her downstairs neighbor for the all-night pacing about. One of my neighbors, it seemed like they were like dropping bowling balls all night above my head, like bowling balls, just like dropping. And then I had the noise in my ventilation system. In her bedroom, in the event he had happened to notice it, she claimed to be an insomniac. The pacing about continued during her recent 36-hour absence from the area, so they were still doing it even though she was gone. When our contact politely alerted her to the fact that her apartment had apparently been entered during her absence, she told him, in effect, to mind his own business, and then immediately complained to the building manager that he was stalking her. Of course. She conveniently forgot to inform the building manager that she had assiduously courted this individual for several months without success, and that she had been stealing his newspapers on a regular basis. On one occasion, she had handed him a weak accumulation of those papers, claiming that they had been left outside of the door on another apartment. Her reason for collecting and saving the newspapers had not been delivered to her, but she works for the Department of Justice, so she's okay. The guy's crazy for saying it about her, but, you know. Recurrent confrontations by unusually hostile strangers and comments by strangers which appear intended to evoke paranoid reactions. In this context, we note that several individuals have reported confrontations with homeless people who, on closer examination, were found to be fastidiously clean, though garbed in offbeat fashion, wigs included. The same eccentric confronted two of the individuals in contact with us at separate distant locations. He is reported as having feigned mental illness on both occasions and having apparently enjoyed creating a public scene. You can always blame. Mental illness always gets blamed, folks. It always does. Entries into the individual's residence during late-night hours while she is sleeping and or during the day while the individual is elsewhere. In virtually all the cases, the burglars leave evidence of their visits, such as by relocating objects. I've had things left in my apartment that I never bought. Or by committing petty, not-so-petty acts of vandalism. In 2 cases, the burglar's calling card was to slaughter caged pets, leaving the managed carcasses inside their locked cages. That's nice. So this is one of the Africans. The tweets are kind of blurry because I stretched it out, but this is one of the Africans. This is a real person they're doing this to that I showed you in the video. A real person. This is the I am being tortured and abused one. And this is another one. Winnie Mangvendi. She's a targeted individual. I'm not a prototype. She's an African American, or she's an African. And hers started in 2013. That's when they weren't grouped, but I was definitely being messed with because of, you know, everything in my background and the Chinese hack, all the hackings and all the weird stuff that I showed you in those videos. I hate repeating myself, but I'll put those videos in there too, what was going on at my job when I started to notice things that were going on in all the hacked big companies in Pittsburgh. And then these things started happening to me too. And then I had like, things went bad and I had I didn't have a nervous breakdown. I was just driven crazy. So that is part 1. Like I said, it's a 30-page document. That was the first 10. The next 2 videos will be the rest of it. So hope you enjoy it. Definitely looking forward to your comments. Talk